So here's our person tonight, Luke. And the most important thing about him is that he wrote books. Because, of course, not only is he part of the new group of believers, but he's also someone who's writing about it, who's writing down what he knows. And so that makes him particularly important to us. Here he is in a Russian icon, and there he is in the church in Padova, where his body is entombed. You can see the little altar with the tomb right there at the center of this charming church in Padova, Italy, Padua, called Santa Giustina. Now, all through the early 20th century, people have laughed at Padova and their little Santa Giustina because they couldn't possibly think they really have Luke in their church, so everybody assumed it had to be somebody else. And, of course, they also chuckled because they knew that in Prague, Prague said they had Luke. But Prague, that's the Cathedral of Prague. But, of course, Prague just had a piece of him, and so everybody kind of thought, well, it was perfectly possible that there was a piece in both places. In the last 10 years, the scientists were allowed to do research on the bones. So the first thing they did was bring Prague Luke to Padova, where all the scientists were. And the Prague Luke was the head. So Prague has the head, or skull of Luke in the Cathedral of Prague. So they brought Luke's head to Padova for the research and fitted it onto the skeleton from Santa Giustina. And guess what? Fit perfectly. The cut at the neck was exactly right. They set the old head on there, and he was delighted. He was delighted to have his head back. He was all in one piece. And so, whole again, exactly what he said, whole again. So they did a test of body DNA and head DNA, and guess what they found out? First of all, it's a man from the first century. And it's a man, and they can tell exactly where he comes from because he was carrying genetic markers that only come from a certain small part of the world. You don't see it in other males. And it is Syria, Antioch. How about that? Now, that's exactly where we think he comes from. He comes from Antioch. That's what all the biblical comments are, that he came from Antioch. But isn't that great that here you have a piece of him in Prague and another piece of him in Padova, and they come all together and they check it out and find out that it really is Luke from Antioch. So, but of course his head had to go back to Prague because they weren't going to give it up. And the rest of him had to go back to Padova. So if you want to visit all of Luke, you have to do 2 trips. You have to go to both Padova and Prague. But what's important to us is that he's a writer. He's a writer of books. And we can assume, we can approximate the dates of his writing better than any of the other 3 because he's not only the author of Luke, but he's also the author of Acts, the book of Acts, the book that tells the stories of Paul's journeys. So those books and those events give us a very clear chronology and help us to understand the chronology of the Gospel according to Luke. And so I would say it's somewhere between 64 and 70. Does the archaeology help us for dating all these things? And does the archaeology give us more information? Yes, a great deal of information. For example, I'll just mention for you a few things that have been found in the last 30 or 40 years that have added to the archaeological evidence that helps us date the events or place the individuals, either one or both. In 1961, we found the Pilate Stone. That was found in Caesarea Maritima. That's a city, a Roman city on the coast of present-day Israel. And we found a stone marker that says Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, under Tiberius. So this stone marker told us exactly, yes, Pontius Pilate is the Roman prefect of Israel at the time of the crucifixion. He did live. He was there. He was in Judea. He was the governor. So that helps tell us something about one of the participants. Number two, the discovery in 1968 by archaeologists in Jerusalem at the one of the gates of Jerusalem of a skeleton of a crucified young man. This was the first ever in all of history. So 2,000 years of crucifixions, and we had never found a skeleton with a nail still present. In other words, a proof that he was crucified. He was in a certain position which told you that he'd been crucified. The nail was present. The position of the skeleton told us that he was crucified exactly the way we see victims crucified in the various paintings. His arms, his wrists, his feet, all of which were marked by the nails, and his 2 feet had been nailed together, his knees, so that he had been turned on the cross, which was often the way you see it, and his leg bone had been broken. Well, that's exactly what you read about in the account, that the Roman soldiers would break the legs of the crucifixion victim because they knew that would speed up their death. Because by breaking the leg, the victim could no longer raise themselves up and get a good breath of air. That's what you're doing on the cross, so that as you spend a long time on the cross, the nail wears on your bone. And so by the time you die, the actual bone, your skeleton, will be marked by the nail, which was exactly what was found here with this young man. But the important thing about it was that it made absolutely clear that the Romans did crucify people in Israel, that they did crucify Jews. That was another question. And most important of all, that although whole books had been written saying this was never done, the fact is the discovery of this skeleton proved that the Romans did allow a family to come and take the victim down from the cross and bury them in their family tomb, because that's where this young man was. So it proved that the story that we get in the Bible could have been correct, that the victim of crucifixion would have been allowed to be taken down and buried. Another recent discovery, which is amazing, is the tomb of the priest in the crucifixion story, Caiaphas. Find out his tomb. This was just in the 90s when workers in Jerusalem were working to build something, and one of the men fell through the ground. He just all of a sudden the ground opened up and he fell into a hole, and when they went in and looked, it was a tomb. And when the archaeologists and experts came and started looking at everything in the tomb, they found an ossuary holding the bones of the person that had died, with the inscription, Joseph, the son of Caiaphas. That's who the person was who prosecuted Jesus. So a second major figure in the actual story is now proven to have existed in that place at that time, and so that helps in our knowledge of exactly the dates of things and the procedures for crucifixion. Okay. In addition, we have Luke in Rome with Paul near the end of Paul's life. We know for sure that he was there. It's in Paul's second letter to Timothy, where he says, only Luke is with me. And in the last chapter of the book of Acts, which we assume Luke wrote, we find several accounts in the first person affirming that Luke's presence in Rome includes including references in Paul's letters and Acts too, when we came to Rome. So another help in understanding the story and the historian and the writer Luke himself.